Oh, hi, Linda. Wait for you to sit down. Okay, let's call this meeting to order. First order of business is we have Rob on the phone. Can I have a motion to allow Rob? Linda, second. Jennifer? Please vote. We're waiting on the vote. Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you. Welcome, Rob. Okay, first order of business is approval of, or second order of business is approval of the minutes. Can I have a motion, please? Linda, second. Betty, are there any changes or corrections? Any comments? Okay, please vote. Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you. Informational items. First is monthly financial report as of March 31st, 2025. Hi, Julie.
Good afternoon, Sharon, Chairperson Williams. We have March, which is the first quarter, so we should be about 25%. So countywide, we have 19.8% of expected revenues, and for expenditures, 17.7%. And in the general fund, we've received 19.3% of revenues and 20.5% of expenditures. Giving your committee a high-level viewpoint of a few items that show up in red. If you have any questions, this generally is a repeat year after year, but with the first quarter report, I thought it would be good to mention. As you all know, it's tax season now, so the first installment of taxes won't come until June, the June report, so that will be coming in the next quarter. PPRT, our next distribution will be in July. Also coming in July will be we expect will be an updated report from IML, which will give us a good idea of what they expect for state shared revenues coming forth. They will do a really thorough job of estimating that. That will play a huge impact as we start the FY26 budget. PBRT, as expected, was lower this year, and we are hopeful, but still uncertain what the second half of the year will look like for PBRT, but we are continuing to keep an eye on it. Last month, I brought to your attention that the local use tax has been drastically lower, and that is due to legislative changes that is offset then by increases in our sales tax, supplemental sales tax, and public facility sales tax. I did go ahead and add some estimates of what we think for the first 2 months of activity will be projecting out for FY25. Again, that's only off the 2 months of activity, so those numbers will be refreshed as time goes on. From what I see for the first couple months, I'm hopeful that whatever decline happens in local use tax will be more than made up in sales tax. But again, 2 months is not a trend, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. Mentioned earlier, the County Operations Committee, we have a grant for the digital equity that we rolled over appropriations for of $117,000. So you'll see in county admin, it looks like the revenues are below budget. That's primarily due to this grant because we have a high amount of budget, which with it being extended through next year, we probably won't receive all of that money this year. So just wanted to bring that to your attention. Also, in the public defender, they also had a grant expected that they don't have any expenses or any revenues recorded for that yet. So their department's revenue also looks below. Fines, in this year or the prior fiscal year, we changed the late fees on property taxes to the fines category. And so that doesn't come in until December. So fines look low and they will look low the rest of the year. But looking at the fines revenue through March, we're at 33.9% of the expected budget, not accounting for the property taxes, the fees on property taxes. Lastly, I want to update on revenues. If you remember, a month or two ago, we had a contract with Four Creeks Wind for the wind energy project. We did receive $40,000 as required by the contract for the reimbursement, and so as those expenses come through, we'll also be recording that revenue. From the expense side, we have the interfund and department changes do look higher than expected for through the third quarter, but that is primarily due to we have insurance premiums that we pay in January, so that will always be inflated. But by the end of the year, it should even out. Transfers for debt service, we always do twice in January in order to make sure that we have funds available for the bond payments that we just send the checks for. So that is also repeat from year prior. I just wanted to highlight that in the general fund, the election commission, it looks higher, but that is due to 2 elections that happened this spring. And the county coroner looks a little higher, but they had funds rolled over for the purchase of a vehicle that was all spent also in the first quarter. And then looking at the fund balance, reserve limits for all the funds, there are 2 funds that popped up this month, but both of those are property tax supported. So once those monies start rolling in, those should be at or within the fund reserve policy limit, if not by the end of the fiscal year. Those were some of the highlights that I had for March. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Any questions? Okay, thank you. Next, we have the Long-Term Care Services Fund Report.
Good afternoon. This month, end of March, I know it feels like a long ways away, but because we're technically May committees, it just seems like a long time ago, March. We are at $2.7 million for the fund balance. We've earned in total about $90,000 in interest in the account between last year and this fiscal year, and we are still on track to be at the fund balance at end year of $4.12 million in the account. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions? Okay. Thank you. Next, we have accounts payable, employee reimbursement, and purchase card activity for April of 2025.
Yes. In your packet, you have a lengthy report of all of the payments that were paid out in April. If you have questions on anything specific, I will try to answer those for you.
Any specific questions? Okay. Moving on, Peoria County Capital Projects, funding sources, and progress.
Yes. As you can see from the report, we are very busy with construction projects. You've probably noticed some activity began outside in the Courtyard Plaza, which is exciting to see. And we have a lot of projects going, and if you have any questions on specific ones, I'll attempt to answer those for you.
Questions for Heather? Okay. We are at resolutions. Our first resolution is general fund transfer policy inactivation. Can I get a motion to get that on the floor, please? Linda, second. Jimmy? Okay.
Okay, so this is a follow-up from last month's conversation. This is in regards to the Long-Term Care Services Fund and how in December of 2023, the board had approved a policy where 50% of the surplus of the general fund in any fiscal year would be transferred to the Long-Term Care Services Fund in an effort to pay off the Headington Oaks bonds that are callable in December of 2032. Last year, as you know, or fiscal 24 surplus, or fiscal 23 surplus, I should say, was incredibly healthy. And we made a $3.269 million, I believe, contribution to the Long-Term Care Services Fund, which brought it in the black and really set us up to meet that target, not just on time, but early. So our recommendation after last month's discussion is to essentially inactivate this policy. And what it essentially means is the board can go back to how you have always done, and whatever the general fund surplus is at the end of the fiscal year, you can decide where you want that to go. Sometimes you let it all roll back into the general fund reserves. Sometimes you will put a portion of it in the capital projects fund. It's entirely up to the board and your policy to decide. This, the policy that is being inactivated, that would essentially force you to put it into half of it into the Long-Term Care Services Fund. It does not take away your ability to put anything into that fund going forward if you wish. It just takes away you being forced to do that. So that's what this recommendation is today.
So really, in reality, we may not ever have to transfer any more money into that long-term care fund, correct?
Correct. I've done, I remember Phelan last month had asked about if we had included inflationary adjustments in for the Long-Term Care Services Ombudsman program, and we had not. So I reran the numbers with those, and it looks like even if we had 3% inflation a year on that contract, only using that contract that currently exists, we'd still have $920,000 of a surplus projected, which would be about 8 years worth of additional long-term care through that program, including inflationary adjustments. So, and that's without any additional general fund contributions.
Any questions? Okay, please vote. That looks unanimous. Thank you. Okay, next resolution. Ordinance to amend Peoria County's purchasing ordinance, Chapter 6.5-34-36, excuse me, to require a community workforce agreement in public works project awards exceeding limits set by state statute 55 ILCS 5/51022, currently $30,000. Can I get a motion to put this on the floor, please? Phil, second. Terry, okay. Scott, you take it away.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. This was deferred from last month's meeting. In that interim period, we've done a couple of things that I just want to highlight for the committee members that are all in your packet. One, you'll see material revisions and updates to better explain and clarify what is being recommended. That was based on the feedback that we received at last month's committee meeting. A couple things to quickly highlight within those edits that you see the red line version of in your packets. First and foremost, the language that is in the ordinance, which is what is the item being voted on, is new language to be added to Chapter 6.5 of the Peoria County Code of Ordinances. So there is no red line version of the ordinance itself because the recommended language does not exist today. Second, there's two components to what is being recommended. The first deals with building construction projects and the responsible bidder ordinance, and the second deals with road and bridge projects, primarily road projects that deal with the bonding capacity of prospective bidders on those road projects. Additionally, and finally, before I'm happy to answer any questions the committee might have, there was a lot of discussion last week, a lot of questions about what that are best answered by having a sample community workforce agreement document actually attached to that. So we added a sample of what that would look like. That sample document is something that we would incorporate into a bid specification for a road project, a bridge project, or a building construction project. And all the prospective bidders then would know that that is something that they have to agree to if they're going to be eligible to submit a bid and be considered for a possible bid award. That document gives quite a bit of flexibility in terms of when it should be applied or when it should not be applied, and there's certainly several examples that we could go into. Right for the moment, I'll leave it there, Madam Chair, and I'm happy to answer any questions of the committee.
Questions? Jimmy?
So I know I've had some conversations with multiple people around the horseshoe, but so the origin of this. So it came out of my fault originally, infrastructure. It was an infrastructure question. So some infrastructure we had talked to Chairman Salzer. Come to find out, this is really something that should have been in finance. So when I found out that error of having that, I did call Chairman Williams, Chairwoman Williams, and Vice Chair Williams of the Finance to apologize of that. So the origin of why this came through was, for some of us that have been around the horseshoe for a long time, is on township seal coating bids, where we've always lacked competitive multiple bids on that. Or I shouldn't say we lacked. It is one of the things that there are very few contractors in that realm, and so most of our bids come in with two. Some have a little bit more, but a few years ago, we had multiple protests that would come. We actually ended up in a lawsuit where we were sued by the townships over that. We got that rectified to Member Windish's and Member Kelch's credit, and to the Amy and the highway team. We got our bids moved up from usually about in the April was when we would take them out, to where we would get them out in February, which was really unheard of. We've had a couple of townships that have now basically separated to go do their own bids and do that separately. It's worked great the last couple of years, but everybody's caught on to that. So what that entails is that there is a box that we check from IDOT about your bonding requirements, which you make sure IDOT pre-qual. One of the contractors basically is sitting at 1.82 million, roughly. Has gone up and down the last few years, if I do believe. Staff has talked to them about trying to do that. There's really appears to be no interest other than them staying at that $1.8 million bonding requirement from IDOT. I did talk to some contractors about that. To move up to the next level, there is a cost in that would cost the contractor about $15,000-$20,000 to move into that next level for IDOT. This contractor is perfectly content at the 1.8. Not everybody's looking, I don't know if they just don't want to grow or what, but they are just happy where they're at. So this has become an issue for us. So in conversations, talking back and forth, people are terrified, the township road commissioners, that we would only be down to one possible bidder on these projects, which is back to where we would be, which we would just recently had, where a protest was filed and all the bids were thrown out, and one contractor on those scenarios won those bids. So it really eliminated competition. But we still want to have good bids. We know the contractor can do the work because they are doing more than that work. But the way that box is, it doesn't give us flexibility. You either uncheck it or you check it. So one of the things that was brought forward was Bloomington, Normal, and McLean County have all recently passed community workforce agreements on their horizontal and their workforce things. It was brought up, would that solve the box checking? One member's opinion, I thought it would solve that. So we had the conversations. I talked to some counterparts in McLean. I got three the ordinances and gave them to staff to review because they were all not wildly different, but they all had some different language in it. I do think the draft that staff made was a much better version of what was presented in those others. The others had some unrealistic expectations, I feel like, in that. The reason that we settled at $30,000 is because everything over $30,000 at the courthouse is basically going out for bid anyway, and that is the Scott's threshold. So that's how we decided at the $30,000 number. Part of the reason then we looked at it to put it across was on the vertical, that was vertical side for the roads, so on the horizontal side, and I know is one of the things that there's been a lot of questions on is what is an actual approved apprenticeship program. So an apprenticeship program is a DOL certified apprenticeship program, or a BAT, Bureau of Apprenticeship. But there is what we've found, and we've seen it here on some county bids lately. They have not been low bid on anything, but we've had the DOL is not in the business of saying you can't have an apprenticeship. But they do check every once in a while and randomly pull them whether or not you have apprentices in those programs or not. So we've had some certificates. One company submitted a certificate that had been revoked for 3 years. That was on staff to figure that out. City of Peoria has had some problems recently and actually thrown out some bids with basically non-apprenticeship programs. There's one company here that actually has a program that is registered in the state of Mississippi. They have 0 apprentices here in the state of Illinois, nor are they sending anybody, but they have a certificate. So most of the projects around here are larger projects. We've always used PLA, Community Workforce Agreement, or whatever term you want to refer to it. So we talked about putting that across the board, and then we would not check that box for the 1.9. They still have to be bonded. They'll still have to submit a bond on the work. We're just not going to say IDOT's really one of the only businesses that say you can only do this much work is what you are. That doesn't happen usually in the horizontal side. You can get a bond, you can add work. In theory, some banks would say you can only do so much work, but there's nobody that puts a number on the limit of what you do. So to do that, that was always to keep reputable contractors to bid on that, because in the past when we did not have that box checked, there's been a bad experience. That contractor would not meet that, so we put basically a safety check on that. I got to give staff a lot of time that credit. I mean, they researched it. We had me and Matt Windish had some conversations over it. I know there was a lot of questions out there. So, for example, right now, the exterior of the courthouse, when we used the HHS campus, that was under PLA, Community Workforce Agreement. Exterior of the courthouse, that has a lot of fountain features in it. The contractor on that does not have an approved apprenticeship program. They were allowed to bid this project because under the community workforce agreement, they are partnering with one of the local unions in Peoria, and they will have an apprenticeship program to get that job. To me, that's a win-win. You're hiring local people, and that contractor was allowed to bid a project that they were not going to be able to allow to bid. Responsible bidder is a very important thing. We pay in prevailing wage. There is an actual component for training. So what we've always said, when you define what is the lowest responsible bidder, you can always add what your definitions are. So we had defined part of that as an RBO, responsible bidder ordinance, that says we needed training component to that. It's been a long-standing policy. I know that some of us around here have seen. We've had contractors bid and we've thrown it out. They've not met our requirements. This does add some greater flexibility to that, where this does say community workforce agreement. If a company from Chicago comes, they're agreeing to the letter of assent back there. They assign, it's a three-party agreement, which we've always had, whether it be between the local union, the contractor, and us. They hire local workers, put them to work, the cycle of the economy back here instead of money going outside of our economy. So this was a way that we thought could actually solve our issue and allow to keep getting bids in there. Because realistically, and I don't want to put words in anybody, from what I've heard from township road commissioners, is they want to see some sort of action on this. We cannot just be in a cycle of one bidder and every year we throw out the bidders. And I believe probably what happened in this is the reason we've seen this for the last couple of years is we got ahead of the game and started putting out everything earlier. We are not the only county that checks that box. So other counties started going out for bid earlier too, and we're right back there. A couple of years ago, I would say, and not to put words in Amy's staff or whatever, or staff's mouth, when one of the first times a protest was filed, they actually did not submit all the jobs that they had. Somebody could say, well, that's not very professional. Yes and no, but at the time, the question is, what jobs do you have? You could have been low bid on those jobs, but you have not been awarded those jobs, so not all awarded jobs were done. I think Amy or Jeff or Mark had to spend a considerable amount of time calling their counterparts across, finding out the jobs, actually to see if there was a hearing to rule on that. What I don't want to happen is that we have one bidders across the board and competition is out. We already have one of the highest prices. If you ask IDOT, we have one of the highest prices for asphalt and chip sealing anywhere in the state. And to not have competition is not good for our local townships, nor is it good for us. So other communities have started going to this community workforce agreement, and that was in the conversation. I thought it would be something good for us to transition to and hopefully solve that problem. So I could probably talk, I know I've talked for a lot longer than this to many of you on the phone about it, so I'm happy to answer any questions if you have an uncomfortable level with it or you have more questions that you would like to see addressed. But that is basically how we got to where we're at, and that this started probably February, March-ish maybe.
Additional questions? Terry?
I have a question relative to the sample workforce agreement that is attached to the purchasing ordinance. Does that change, and if it does from project to project, how does that language get agreed upon? Do we have, as a board, do we have any control over that language? Because I've become comfortable with this over 3 or 4 weeks of racking my brain and other people racking it for me. But what makes me somewhat comfortable now is in the actual workforce agreement. But as an addendum, I want to make sure that's not changing from project to project. I like this one. I want it to be stable or even part of the agreement.
So that, not to speak for staff, that we're not really, what we're changing is, currently when we bid out in our documents, we're asking for the RBO, and you would submit your BAT back, your certificate back, saying that you have an apprenticeship program. This now becomes, this document, to me, there's no change to it. It's been successful for us for all of our projects, back to the museum, Headington Oaks, to HHS campus recently here. That's a good document. It addresses everything. I don't see anything to change. And that would be, that is the document that now gets included when Jim puts out for bid everything, that document is seen. And that's the way I would envision it from a purchasing standpoint, that is the document that is out for bid. And that does not get to change. Whatever, that document that was submitted for everybody to review today is the document.
But it is described as a supplement or an addendum in the presentation. It would make me that much more comfortable if we had the actual workforce agreement as part of the ordinance, so that it can't change unless you make another ordinance change, because the value of what we're passing is actually in the workforce agreement, not so much in the purchasing ordinance, if that makes sense.
I guess that would be a staff question of, your ordinance would usually refer to ... and then that is a supplement for you to look at a different portion, correct?
Yeah, correct, Mr. Dillon. The sample document, first and foremost, is the document that we've used on every major construction project dating back to the museum. I know we had one when we built the juvenile detention center and the jail addition, but I couldn't find it. So the most recent example is the museum. We created one for that. We created one for the construction of Headington Oaks and for the Health and Human Services campus, and then would move it forward. So it's a static document that all we've done is change dates, essentially. To your second point, and to Mr. Ruland's question, typically the regulation would not have the sample agreement in it. I totally understand, Mr. Ruland, your concerns and the value of that, and wanting to codify what the actual agreement says. Ultimately, that's a policy decision for the committee and the board, but typically that would not, we would not see the agreement itself within the ordinance.
Terry, anything else?
Jed,
Unless,
can we ask legal's opinion on that?
exactly.
I was just going to give a clarification that the ordinance itself doesn't represent or doesn't reference that specific workforce agreement. It in section 2, it states that in good faith we're going to negotiate a community workforce agreement, or we could use some Department of Labor. Let me see. You'd condition the award upon the requirement that the manager or contract negotiate a community workforce agreement with the labor organization. So it just references that we will enter into a community workforce agreement, not this specific one. So I just wanted to clarify, your ordinance doesn't reference that particular document as an addendum. The agenda briefing does, and it gives it as an example. But what you're voting on today wouldn't lock in that version. The ordinance says you would negotiate that agreement.
To follow up then, is it feasible to record the current workforce agreement as a document and reference it so that it can't be changed without the board's approval?
I think that you can word the ordinance in a way that requires the use of the county's workforce agreement, and doesn't say that you're going to negotiate it, but I think in practicality, agreements usually, I mean, if you're having another party sign it, it's going to be negotiated, or the potential for it to be negotiated. Otherwise, you need to word it that we are just requiring a contractor to enter into our established workforce agreement. And then you could amend that agreement as needed as a policy decision, throughout the years.
That's what I'm aiming for. I think that's a reasonable request. Is that a lengthy process to make that change? Is that something that's difficult?
To reword your ordinance?
Well, in some time frame. Again, the essentials of what I'm agreeing to as I support this currently, those essential elements are in the workforce agreement, not in the ordinance. So I want to protect those and protect that workforce agreement.
Not to add extra, but to Mr. Ruland's point, is it something that we amend the ordinance as is, and then to codify this, that we actually have to vote to say, hey, this is the actual document that the board approves, to reference back to that, so that this is, because this will never be a negotiation. We're the owner. You dictate the terms to when you put them out there. So
It could,
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, it could also be a part of, that document could be a part of each bid award's approval of the board. So when you vote to award a bid, we would include the workforce agreement for that project as part of the packet, and your vote would basically do two things. It would approve the workforce agreement for that project, and would award the bid for that project. We could also do it that way.
Yes, I think that you would want to just amend the ordinance, if I'm reading the room, amend the ordinance just to say that you're going to require the county's community workforce agreement. And then I would not put the agreement as part of the ordinance like Scott suggested. I wouldn't have that document either in the code, but I would use it as part of your bid documents. And just remove the back and forth negotiation language that's in the ordinance.
So we can do that today?
You can, but I think we would need to take a little recess to make sure we read through the ordinance and capture all the areas where it would need to be amended.
Paul?
So is there any negotiation on this ordinance? Does the county negotiate with the bidders on this, or basically, since I've never done this, or basically we say you have to abide by our agreement here?
it's basically a legal document saying that you're abiding by these terms that are set forth on the bid.
You've talked about them, there's negotiation. Is there negotiation on that, or have we negotiated in the past, or basically we just say you have to abide by what we have here?
So typically, these agreements, in the history that I've seen them, whether they be Capital Development Board or IDOT, the contract is in the bid documents, that it is put out there. All parties have agreed to it. All the contractors, when they have bid, all the subcontractors, when they have bid, that they knew that that was part of the original bid documents, and so that there is, they don't come and say, well, can we take this out? Can we add that? It's just
Okay.
the legal document for them to.
Okay.
There, on the back page is usually letters of assent, where the contractor signs the letters of assent agreeing to the terms of the contract.
Mr. Rosenbaum, for the three project labor agreements that I've seen come through and be approved by the board, that being the museum, the Headington Oaks, and Health and Human Services, there was no negotiation.
Steve?
Yeah, I would probably, I mean, I look at the scope of work in the sample that we have today, and it says that covers construction, demolition, alteration, painting, landscaping, renovation, and repair of building or structure or other work. But we take the category we were trying to address, which is called seal coating, which I think if I read right in the IDOT manual, that's called a maintenance work. It's not called construction or demolition. So, I mean, I don't want to be cautious. We don't get into this. It won't even apply to the category of work that we're trying to solve. And I don't know, Amy, is that accurate that seal coating is a maintenance category or? Yeah. So again, I don't want to get too technical, but you could throw it out in a heartbeat going, you can call it for maintenance so it doesn't qualify. So again, let the legal minds address this. I understand what Terry's trying to get to is to codify some of this, but I'm going to go back with the legal side saying we probably need some flexibility and not put it into our ordinance. And I have some other comments for later, but I just wanted to comment on that for the moment.
Additional questions? Linda?
I understand why we would be concerned about only having one bidder and how that's going to drive the price up. I get that perfectly. But do I understand correctly that the box that says IDOT pre-qualified would not be checked and that solves the problem? And if the highway department is accustomed to checking that box when they use motor fuel funds and so forth, then, I don't understand, I guess, why we need this besides our project labor agreement when it seems to me like in this one area of seal coating, checking the box or not checking it solves the problem for us of bringing in more competitive bids. Do I not understand this?
So if we uncheck that box, and this is a conversation we've had numerous times in infrastructure, right now that is a safety factor for the county board, that we have good contractors, we have contractors that can perform the work, they're IDOT certified. IDOT clarifies what your bonding amount is. When we uncheck that box, then it's, which other counties and some rural counties do, then some of the reasons that we've checked that box, those same players would then be able to bid a project and that could potentially qualify because we did not check that IDOT pre-qual box. So it's been a safety net for us.
Right, but so then why do we need this
so if we take
community agreement to do what we could do in the one instance of seal coating and not check the box for that one thing? That's what I don't understand
if
about
you
this.
Uncheck that box, we're basically checking that box or unchecking that box for your IDOT bonding authority. So if we uncheck that, then potentially the reasons that we check that box would be the same reasons that could now bid the projects. By putting that community workforce agreement across the board is then the safety net to put on there that some of those bad actors that we've been trying to avoid, they would also look at that as like the IDOT pre-qual and would not bid on that due to that agreement.
So the highway department would not check the IDOT pre-qual box, but instead we would put this agreement in, and that would take care of the seal coating?
So this agreement would go across all, whether horizontal or vertical, on our construction projects.
But that's another question I have. We're trying to solve one problem here, and now we're taking that solution and moving it to all these other projects. And I don't know.
It doesn't, Linda, it's not really changed. All of our major projects have always been under these agreements. So it's really just codifying it all across all of our construction projects, which for most of our actual vertical projects have been under these agreements, large dollar agreement, large projects, not our typical, so probation or Bobby's office are not under those agreements, but they would have been under the responsible bidder ordinance. The reason we went across the board is we've had those issues with the responsible bidder, and then we've also had, in the scenario of the outdoor plaza, it allowed a non-union contractor from out of the area to actually bid a project and award that project. It worked out in our favor. So it granted some flexibility in the ordinance. The ordinance we have now, I do consider it to be a good ordinance. But when we were looking at the highway, how do you still protect the taxpayers' dollars, still get reputable contractors, and then not uncheck that box? If you uncheck that box, we're going to be back to some bad actors without some sort of safety precaution on that.
So you're saying the community agreement are the safeguards for unchecking the box for seal coating?
Yes.
Okay, but then again, I go back to, why do we need that for everything else? We don't have IDOT pre-qualifications for vertical projects, right?
No, but in the conversation that we were talking about, we've seen some instances with false apprenticeship programs being submitted to the county that were having to be verified. And we've used it on some larger projects where some non-union have been able to bid on that project, partner, and use the apprenticeship programs to a win-win for the company, a win-win for us and across the board. So then that conversations, we put it across all construction projects.
Matt?
So, I don't know how to come approach this, but like what Linda is saying, I agree 110% with Linda, and this has been coming 3 years ago. I'm gonna say from my side, this is the lesser of the evil to solve what you were trying to say. I agree with you, but I don't know that we can get to that. So this is I'm just going to say the lesser of the evil to solve the situation that we have across the board. That is where I am in favor of this, but I'll keep going down that road if you want to go down that road again. That's all I got. I think this is a good, what do you want to call it? Compromise from one extreme to the other. This is the best compromise of where you're sitting now. That's where I was 3 years ago.
Steve, were you wanting to cover some other issues?
I'll just add a few more comments. So I think Scott commented that we've had, in the recent 10, 12 years, we've had the project labor agreements for those 3 big projects, but the majority of our construction projects that we've done have not had that. Just for clarification, unless someone corrects me. And I've been supportive of the project labor agreements, those big projects, because it has a lot of good provisions in it of no strike and different things that allow us as the owner of the project to make sure it's done on time and all the right things. So I'm in support of project labor agreements, kind of along Linda's line of a couple things. The IDOT check the box is actually more than bonding. There's like 6 categories. There's an experience factor, equipment factor. There's several factors in there that are put in place to ensure, you could say they're red tape and this and that from the state, but they're to ensure that if we're building a bridge or we're doing a major road work, we get bidders that can come in and actually do the work and meet the qualifications and we got some assurance back through IDOT that they validated, because they do that work for us. We don't have to do the pre-qual, right? IDOT does all the pre-qual work. Those companies have to submit and update their records. It's work we don't need to do. So I'm not willing to uncheck the box on all IDOT projects for the county. I'd be willing to come up with a compromise for the one category we're trying to address. But if we're saying we're going to uncheck the box for all IDOT, that statement alone right there is enough to absolutely would never support this. So if that's the solution, right there off the top, I will not accept unchecking the box for all IDOT projects, because this doesn't protect us the way the IDOT pre-qual protects us for big projects, the hundreds of millions of dollar type projects, not just the seal coating project. So that would stop me in a heartbeat, and I'll just maybe pause at that. And I support a lot of what Linda said. I think this is it's a solution to one specific problem that was going to open the door for a lot of other issues and, vertical and everything else that I would rather stick with doing the PLAs for the projects that are big. I think that's great. But putting this on every little project, I think is too much. So at this point, I'm still a no vote, but I respect everyone's position where they stand with this. Thank you.
Pat?
The way that I understand it, and I think, Jimmy, you would agree, or Amy, that this would be in effect either way, but we would still be optional whether we chose to do that or not, correct? To what Steve is saying, we still would have that option to have both if we choose. It just gives us it would give us the option to what to fall back on. I
Well,
guess.
we've always talked about it. We're not going to say that you're not IDOT certified. That basically it's so when you check the box, like you said, there's different things that IDOT, we would still say you're an IDOT certified contractor, but we would not be saying, currently we say we're following your bonding limits on how they rate. We would be taking that bonding requirement off of that and letting them predetermine whether or not they could do the work. So just like 2 years ago, I think Limestone threw out the low bids, and awarded it to the secondary company because they were upset about some oil. So you still have the flexibility to either award, not award, not to put words in anybody's mouth, but Matt, when we're at IDOT, it even said, well, we did not want to change the way that these bids were put out when they put out. There was going to be a protest. Somebody at IDOT said, well, you can change the bid and not say that you're going to waive that box requirement after the fact. Well, no, you don't put out for bid something and then change the rules after the fact. So this was going to allow us to give the flexibility to not have that in there and allow staff and the board for when the bid comes in to make those decisions. The bids will still come in. We could still turn them down, or we'll still see everything. So it's not us, it's giving some flexibility in the bids.
Are there separate, and I've looked at the IDOT forms, I've gone through this, but to me, can you separate it out and say, I want an IDOT qualified, except I'm going to exclude the one of 7 categories called the financial responsibility?
So that's why I was just asking Amy. That would be put in the bid specs for the job. I mean, here's the whole legal portion of waiving, which basically gives you a lot of gray area, I think, to do what you want in your bid documents. So we just put that in our bid documents that go out. The bidders are then going to know through the bid documents.
So we would select which bids we waive and which ones we don't through the highway?
No, but being as proposed is that we would still say that you have to be IDOT qualified, but we were not going to put in the bonding threshold. That does not mean that the contractor is not going to have to still submit a bond for when they do the project.
I mean, it's their financial capacity, right, to do the work. It's the calculation. You call it a bond, semantics.
It's a calculation of what IDOT says they can do.
Their capacity to do work, their financial capacity to do work. Again, it's.
And I
Are
don't
you
really know.
suggesting we should take it off on all the financial capacity? You remove it from all IDOT, or all highway bids going forward and put this in place and allow all the other qualifications to remain? And
This document that is before the board today becomes the new document.
But we didn't specify in this document that we would waive, this is replacing something.
The document then refers to that. I mean, the ordinance isn't going, right now, we don't have an ordinance that says do we check that box or do we not check that box? I don't even remember, I don't believe there's an ordinance saying that. That has been staff's determination whether or not to do that. And it has always been the board and the horseshoe has supported that decision. But I think that's why we've had that lawsuit that was brought to us against the townships, is because some of the township road commissioners were against that box being checked, because some of them have very tight budgets. There was a few of them that went multiple years without actually doing any road projects over the deal. So to Matt's credit and to Danny's credit and to Amy's, we tried to rack our head, how do we move around this? And we got to where we were about bidding earlier, and now we're right back to where we were from a few years ago. And this was the solution that came out of it, of how we move it forward.
Are there any, Paul, go ahead.
I might not be getting this, Jimmy, but wouldn't it be just easier, instead of doing this document, a new document, just saying when we put it out for bid, you have to be IDOT qualified, but we're just not going to go for the bonding part? Wouldn't have that been simpler to do? Or am I missing something that,
So this was, and I don't know if they ran into the same issue per se, but this was something that just happened in McLean, Normal, and Bloomington. So the townships, when they put it out for bid, it was brought up, hey, this was a way to solve this issue and move that forward. So when it was presented, hey, might be a path forward, we said, all right, let's talk about it and investigate it. So I think this was the way to solve that, Paul.
are we adding anything else into this document that the IDOT didn't have in it? Because, I mean, it's been brought up about the apprenticeship stuff. Was that not in the IDOT?
So it is. So you have to have responsible bidder. There's contractors out there that currently would not meet those. What it does, what this does says is when you sign this agreement, if you're Phil's Landscaping and Phil is not signatory to anybody, Phil can then bid on that project, and then he has access through that project. He will be signatory for one job only to the laborers or the operators on that project. He will get a worker from them, and they're using that access to that apprenticeship program, which would then, now they're allowed to bid the project, which under our current agreement, if they didn't have access to any of that, they would not be allowed to do that. That doesn't make,
So our current one doesn't have that.
I'm adamant about education and that component, but our current one does not allow people to bid if they want to bid certain things. We've thrown out contracts for people that have not been able to meet those requirements, and rightfully so. But this would allow, like I said, the pool company, for example. There was multiple pool companies. They were signatory to places in Chicago. The pool company came here and bid. They're partnering with a local because they have a PLA attachment, community workforce agreement. They're working that out. That's all stuff we didn't have to work out. That was contractually because of that document they worked out. They are going to be able to bid that project and hire a local person instead of bringing everybody from Chicago and meet the terms of that agreement and put somebody to work. To me, I think that's a win-win for across the board from everybody.
Sharon, can I ask another question?
Go ahead, Linda.
Okay. So just one last time, if we adopt this community agreement, does that mean going forward that our highway department will not be requiring any of their jobs to be IDOT pre-qualified and checking the box? Or only what solves the seal coating problem?
So that would really, this would take it to the next level. We talked about, I mean, it's really a decision of the board. Like if you want, on a large Maxwell station, if you still want that IDOT pre-qual box to be checked, we could still say in a committee meeting, I want that bonding authority box to be checked in that. But what this is saying is it gives us the leeway. You're still going to have to be IDOT certified, IDOT qualified. We're just saying that now Amy has the flexibility through this agreement to say, I'm not going to put the bonding cap on there. It's the flexibility not to. Doesn't mean you don't have to, but we're giving her the flexibility to not put that on there.
And, you know, perhaps this is a question for Amy, but if you aren't doing that, does IDOT frown upon this when you're using motor fuel funds and they have these pre-qualifications that they want?
We've asked about seal coating and checking the box, and IDOT doesn't seem to have a preference either way. We haven't asked about other types of work, like bridges or road projects.
Well, I mean, I would never be comfortable driving over a bridge that you didn't check the box and say it's going to be IDOT pre-qualified. I mean, but that's just me.
So IDOT has no problems with community workforce agreements. A lot of their projects are actually under community workforce agreements. McCluggage Bridge was under agreement. The new airport tower is being built under a similar agreement. These are very common agreements. Most every CDB project, even some projects that are very small, almost every CDB project that I know of that we've had around here has all been under project labor agreements. This, for the state, does not look like what this document we're putting on there. Actually, the federal government doesn't even look poorly upon it because the one that's being used at the airport was approved by the federal government. So the government has no objections if you make these type agreements.
Well, I mean, but, okay, all right, I won't.
Paul?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Okay, you were talking earlier about we got sued from some, will this take, if we didn't do this and if Amy just unchecked the box for bonding, for seal coating in the bid, could they still sue us, or is this taking care of? I'm just, anytime we can make it so we're not getting sued is always a great thing. And so, it's not saying I'm for it, against, or anything. I just want to know what's causing.
So we won that lawsuit, or it was dropped or withdrawn. So it would look real silly now if we're saying we're going to uncheck that box, and we had a lawsuit saying that we want to keep that box checked. Well, the argument is now is we're giving flexibility by saying that that can be waived in there by adding some other restrictions to that to move that forward. It is Matt, I don't want to speak on behalf of the township road commissioners, but I think we're trying to, what the idea and goal here is, yes, we're looking at our other projects, but on the road side of it is giving greater flexibility to have increased competition for road projects.
Say that again? I would say yes. I guess if you want to go back to that topic, I'm still sitting here with, if we want to go back and revisit that whole thing and open the whole can of worms again, I'm sitting here with Linda, but I think I still say this is just this is the happy medium here for that. I guess I should have just involved Linda 3-4 years ago, and we should have started there.
Linda still wants the box checked. You don't want the
Well,
box
that's what
checked.
Linda said, she wanted the box checked, so now she's got me thrown, so I'm still saying this is where it is. We're all sorts of confused now, we don't even know, I don't know.
I mean, a potential solution is,
It still gives us the opportunity to check or not check the box, though. We still have that. If it's a
Steve?
bridge, we have the
Oh,
choice to
sorry.
make sure that that's there. If it's not, which would be, I would agree with that, so,
is there,
yeah.
is there an option? We're trying to solve the seal coat one.
Well, the
So
seal
here's-
coat sale, if you just want to fix the seal coat thing, it's pretty simple. Don't check the box, put it out for bid, and let's go on just
Well-
like we all are, but that's not, it doesn't happen.
But I guess I want to add one more thing to that, exactly what you said, Matt. Don't check the box, but require the community workforce agreement in place of that. So we would selectively decide, we either check the box and we use IDOT's rules, or we, for seal coating, we uncheck it, but we, in our bid spec, says you must meet the community workforce agreement, which then prevents, it solves this.
I'm good with any form of
I mean,
it. It all
right?
works.
So you
It works
use-
over the whole, or it works just in that. I'm good with it
Instead
in
of
any
changing our
form.
entire ordinance, we say the highway department has the option to uncheck the box and apply the community workforce agreement in place of that for seal coating. Because that's what we're doing here, but we're extending it for every other project at the county. Just apply it for specific projects that we need to get competitive bids, and we solve it and we move on. Why make it bigger than that? You have a solution?
I'm good with that form too. I think they work. On all of, even across the board, we went through and I don't think that it works against us. I don't know. I'm good with it either way. I could go either way.
Just apply it to the ones you want more qualified bidders or bidders to bid on the seal coat, i.e. apply the workforce agreement. We do that now with our big construction projects. We put a PLA, same thing. We have the right to do that. Why don't we do that for those seal coat ones? That gives us that comfort level that we're trying to get to. It's a solution to the problem without making it bigger.
So it's about standardizing things across the board so that our policies we're not doing one thing over here, one thing over here. This isn't changing from everything that we do in the courthouse would meet or exceed these terms anyway. So it's not really changing anything. But what it does do is it gives us some safety protections on the horizontal, and it allows for greater flexibility per se on some of our projects around that we're doing on horizontal or vertical, because we are spending quite a bit of money here with basically with our ARPA dollars. I would not be, the reason that we brought this forward was to standardize across from our thing. Now we're gonna have it all over the different places. I mean, this is the deal this is what has been brought forth.
Maybe today, with the current purchasing ordinance we have today in place, no changes to it, we have the ability to do PLAs. We do those. We decide which contracts or which bids we want to apply them to. Amy would have that same capability today, I think, with the highway department. She could, in her bid spec, say, we have a community workforce agreement for this bid. We don't have to change our ordinance. I'm going to ask council here. We could apply a PLA to any bid that we want. We're the ones putting out the bid. We put the PLA in place and say, And Amy can make that judgment, just like we made the judgment for Headington Oaks, for HHS, for, all the other projects. And again, I'm in favor of PLAs, don't get me wrong, but let's use them where they need them and not handcuff anything else. And we don't have to change anything, right? We just say, Amy, you have the right to use a PLA on any bid.
What are we handcuffing? There's nothing being handcuffed here.
Well, you're putting it to all other projects. Until we start analyzing all the other projects, I don't know what I
don't understand what there is to analyze across any of those other projects. It's not really changing anything in there. We're having a uniform financial policy across the board. There's nothing that's being handcuffed or detrimental to the county by doing this. So I just want to make that clear. This is not some underhanded bad agreement that is underhanded or handcuffing the county. That is not accurate.
Okay, maybe it has a potential limit bidders for other small work, other projects that are $30,000 above, Bobby's office, as you talked about.
So
some other bidders may not want to do the no strike clause and those other terms that are in this. Again, we can elect to put those in on the bids that we want them, as opposed to just putting it as a uniform policy. Again, we're trying to solve a problem. I'd rather solve the problem than I'll just leave it alone.
I mean, Jimmy gave the example of the contractor from Chicago that if we were under a PLA, they wouldn't have been able to bid it. So this solves that.
No, they would have been able to bid it because the PLA would have still met the qualifications, right? Of being able to bring local workforce in place to meet a PLA.
A PLA was put on that project, and that was at the request of the contractor through asking Scott through a request to the committee, and it was put out as an addendum. Under our current ordinance of an RBO, they would not have met the requirements of that project.
But with the PLA, the current example, the pool one that you mentioned, because they're using local labor, they meet it.
Correct.
Prior to this change, right?
Because a PLA was on that project.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But I want to, because I'm
staring. So one of the examples that we used when we had a meeting was, so when we just built North Station, and if we wanted to insulate that building, if Home Comfort Insulation wanted to come, and I shouldn't even use names. If a company wanted to come in and spray foam that, right now there's probably current in the area about 2 contractors that would meet that, but there's probably 10 out there that do that work, which under this agreement would allow them to come in, one job agreement, utilize that, and participate. So there are advantages for all sides having that. For our end, the reason it was brought forth for this way was for uniformity across all of our documents. So that when Jim is putting out something for bid and Amy's putting out something for bid, that we just have uniformity across all the bids. That we're not having this job is this way, this job is that way. That was the intention.
Additional questions? Okay. So do you want to we were talked about amending it, right? Do you want to cover that for us?
If we're going back to Member Ruland's suggestion to use the county's community workforce agreement as the default, or that it would be part of the bid documents and the county's version would be the one that we enter into. We pulled up the document and there's actually only one small amendment that I see, and I believe Megan can put it up on the screen. If that's where, I'm not sure if that's where the board's going at this point, but if we go back to what Member Ruland was saying, in 2A, instead of saying in good faith negotiate a community workforce agreement, simply saying that well, starting back up at the beginning of 2, unless it's determined that a workforce labor agreement is not appropriate. And you will see later in the ordinance, it talks about how you would do that, how you would make a determination that you're not going to use a community workforce agreement for a particular public works project, or the estimated amount does not exceed $30,000, or as purchasing authority may be increased by the state, the county shall either. There are 2 options here. Now it says that the county shall either require use of the county's community workforce agreement. That's what our attachment to the agenda item sets forth, that example, with labor organizations engaged in the construction industry that represent experienced and skilled construction workers. Or, now this part we've kept in, if we don't use the county's form community workforce agreement for some reason that perhaps Chairman Dillon could explain when this scenario would arise, but you do still have the option to condition the award on the contractor negotiating a community workforce agreement with the labor organizations. And then you'll see, one sentence down, the county can reserve the right to approve that negotiated community workforce agreement. So if there is a scenario where we're not using ours, the contractor and the unions would have to negotiate, and we would still get to bless it.
So to the why you wouldn't use it, an example used in that for some of the gray language of some of the words that were discussed last time. So at 10 o'clock at night, when we had a water sprinkler head break here, we're not worried about having an agreement signed. It's an emergency clause. The administrator has full right and authority. It is situations like that that is considered, I know we like black and white, but it's considered the gray of the things where this document is not to be overburdensome, to allow that when Menold or Blue Sky came at 10:30 at night with 10 people, this document is not in play. That would be an example of not using it.
You have anything to add? Go ahead.
No, so it ended up being a small change to the ordinance. So if you choose to vote to amend, that is the amendment that I would see is necessary.
Terry?
The point of bringing that up earlier is that the content of the workforce agreement is substantial policy, and it shouldn't be left to staff to change that at will in a negotiation with a contractor or anyone else. It should be under the full purview of the board. So, however it needs to be said, I would support as an amendment to refer to the workforce agreement in the purchasing ordinance.
So we have a motion from Terry for the amendment. Okay. Jimmy, you second it? Oh, I'm sorry, Phil. And Jimmy, you second? Or did Terry? Terry, okay. Are there any questions on that? Do you want to add anything?
Just clarifying. So Member Ruland has made the motion to amend, and Chairman Dillon has made the second on the motion to amend? He has the original. We go back to the original after we amend, if we amend. Okay.
Are we ready? Can we vote on that?
You should be able to. What you're looking for is resolution 4.3. I had to add it as a resolution.
Okay.
Ordinance to amend the Peoria amendment.
Yeah.
No, 4.3.
4.3, amendment to workforce agreement ordinance.
So 4.3, mine says 4.2.
Refresh, maybe? Yeah, okay. Were there any questions? We can just go ahead and vote on this. Okay, please vote. It looks like it's unanimous. Okay. Now, Phil, you were the first on this as amended. We're going to vote on it as amended. So Phil is the first. Who's our second? I don't remember. Terry? Terry on the second? Okay. Are there any questions before we vote? Okay, so we're voting on this as amended. Please vote. So we have 2 that voted against, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So, okay. All right, so that passes. Thank you. Great discussion. So now we were at discussion. Are there any additional discussions? Any public comment? Okay, we are at miscellaneous, and Scott has something for us. So thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Madam Chair. You asked me to give the committee just a brief overview of some of the impacts or some of the outcomes of the spring legislative session in Springfield. Before I do that, though, just to let everyone know, we got word this morning from Congressman Sorensen's office that the most recent version of the federal budget working its way through the appropriations process includes full funding for the Ag Lab in the USDA budget. It also includes an increase in dollars with the proposal to move some of the USDA-funded research at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign to the Peoria facility. So good news on the federal front. State budget highlights are from the spring session that ended very early in the morning, Sunday morning. The state budget for the fiscal year that starts July 1 has $55.4 billion in revenues and $55.2 billion in expenditures. Local government distributive fund was held flat. That's a good thing for us. That's where many of our state shared revenues get funneled through. It should be higher than that statutorily, but we didn't lose any ground, so that's a positive. The General Assembly did identify $1.16 billion in new revenues to help balance that budget. Most of those revenues are either sin tax related items or new taxes to businesses. The governor was pretty vocal in his opposition to sales tax and income tax requirement or increases that would impact individuals. The provisions also include $1.6 billion in a bond issuance for state and local capital projects. So both the city and the county have several capital projects that have been authorized, and hopefully we'll see with this bond sale some of those projects come through. One of the things that we were watching, there were then several other bills that we were watching. One was the Energy Omnibus Bill that dealt with both wind energy and solar energy and a whole bunch of other things. It stalled, and so for continued negotiations, we'll see if it comes back in a special session sometime this summer or fall, or if it gets to the veto session later this fall. Pension reform also stalled. There was measures to modify how Tier 2 functions for the pension systems that are not IMRF, which all of our employees and retirees benefit from. There are some of the state pension systems that have an issue with a section of the IRS code, and so part of the attempt was to fix that, but it also would have had impacts on IMRF. So again, negotiations this summer and fall. We'll see if it comes back in the veto session. Third, the mass transit bill also stalled. This was between a $750-ish and $1 billion price tag for the 3 Chicagoland area public transit or mass transit agencies that would have or at least created a new umbrella organization. But we were watching it because included in the language is funding for the Downstate Operating Assistance Program grant, otherwise known as DOPE. There's been a lot of turnover in the board here recently, and so some of you may not be aware that under state statute, we are responsible for mass transit and paratransit in the unincorporated areas of the county outside of CityLink's taxing boundaries. They're a unit of local government, just like we are. They have a boundary. And any part that is, it's paratransit countywide outside their boundary, and then whatever is defined as urbanized outside their boundary, we're responsible for mass transit. Through an intergovernmental agreement, we actually delegated that to CityLink about a decade ago, but I would fully expect that if the Downstate Operating Assistance Program was severely cut or jeopardized, they might think twice about wanting to terminate that intergovernmental agreement, and it would come back to us. And we would not have a mechanism to provide those services, and a business that we really don't want to be in, which is why we partnered with them in the first place. One highlight was the Economic Development Omnibus Bill. That did move in the session, and that's important because there are provisions in that for large steel manufacturers across the state, including Liberty Steel. Happy to try and answer any questions.
Are there any questions for Scott or comments? Okay. Any more miscellaneous? Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you.